Welcome to my channel people. Author link will be on description. Make sure to check it. Silence fell on the Hokage's office to the point that you can hear a pin drop after they heard Hiruzen saying that they actually encountered a beast, spreading terror instead of a human, which raised many eyebrows in the room as this definition was too broad and a beast wouldn't have enough wisdom to act like the thing he was describing. But they decided to wait for him to continue his explanation. That beast. It actually controlled the minds of many people, and manipulated them to torture the villagers that were held captive. Here, Hiruzen paused with a regretful and pained look on his face and some hints of fear that everyone in the room easily noticed. Then he continued by saying, "It was a scene from hell, the people screaming in despair, families were tortured in front of each other, not even the kids were spared from this cruelty." Hiruzen seemed to be having difficulties talking about this, so Bakurio decided to offer him his seat that was opposite to Fugaku, which prompted Hiruzen to nod at him gratefully. It seems like this is when Hiruzen's strong desire for peace was born, and he probably was scarred for life from the scenes he witnessed that day. Everyone in the room had this same thought as they looked at this old man that was trying to talk about this very difficult incident. At first we didn't understand what was going on. But then the first Hokage used his sage mode to enhance his senses and he actually detected that the chakra reserves of one of the humans that seemed to be the mastermind behind all of this seemed to be increasing at a terrifying rate, and the second Hokage said that the chakra they sensed inside didn't seem to belong to the man himself. Instead, it was separate, almost like a tailed beast sealed inside a person, but in his case, it wasn't sealed at all. At this point, Tsunade couldn't hold herself anymore and decided to ask her teacher directly, "Old man, do you really mean that Bakurio's theory about another tailed beast existing out there is true?" Fugaku and Bakurio too wanted an answer to this question because it might change their whole perspective of this world, especially Bakurio who wanted to learn its secrets to deal with the ticking bomb inside his heart. "No, it's not the same," said Hiruzen while shaking his head, and Bakurio's eyes immediately narrowed as he asked, "In what way?" Tsunade and Fugaku, hearing Bakurio's question, suddenly realized that Hiruzen didn't say no, he just said that it wasn't the same, which started to make them have a bad feeling. Hiruzen shot Kurama that was sitting on Bakurio's shoulder a look before he said, "A tailed beast has a certain amount of chakra, and every additional tail would signify an increase in that chakra. However, even tailed beasts have a certain threshold to the amount of chakra that they could hold at one point and would take them some time to recover it after they use all their reserves, and this process happens naturally." At this point, Hiruzen suddenly had a fearful expression on his face as he said, "However, after the two late Hokages engaged in a terrifying fight against this being that witnessed them both going all out, which to this day, left me speechless at thought of something existing that could force them to go that far. And during the fight, they discovered that the beast was using the suffering of the people to recover its strength, and what's more terrifying, and the reason I said it's not the same as a tailed beast, is that the two late Hokages discovered that this beast has a terrifying innate ability that allows it to absorb the negative emotions emanating from the people around it and turn them into a new type of chakra. Never seen before, which the second Hokage named as dark chakra. Impossible, not even I with the help of that old bastard Madara could deal with Hashirama. And you are telling me right now that a beast was able to do it? This is absurd," yelled Kurama in anger, feeling that this story was simply unbelievable when he recalled the terrifying power of that man that stood at the top of the world of ninja as the strongest. Hashirama Senju. Not to mention when he teams up with his brother who's a genius in his own right and can use all kinds of forbidden jutsu. And Fugaku and Tsunade felt the same way, with the exception of Bakurio, who knew the history of this world and what characters like Kagaya could do with just her will, which transformed into Black Zetsu, and he caused countless destruction throughout this world for hundreds of years. So, he ignored Kurama's exclaiming and asked Hiruzen calmly, "How did this beast fight against the two Hokage?" Hiruzen shot Bakurio an appreciative look for staying calm even after hearing such a ridiculous claim before he said, "It all lies in that dark chakra the beast could control. It grants it terrifying regenerative powers and tenacity, not to mention that when used on the people it was manipulating, it could forcefully strengthen their bodies and grant them superhuman strength and speed. This is, how did the late Hokages beat such a monster in the end?" asked Fugaku, understanding clearly that his Mangekyo ability, which he keeps hidden, would at best help him run away if he encounters such a terrifying beast. Meanwhile, Tsunade looked at Bakurio secretly and couldn't help but think, Will his power of death work against this kind of monster? Hearing Fugaku's question, Hiruzen let out a sigh of admiration before he said, even though the power of this beast is hard to imagine, the first and second Hokage's powers aren't a joke either. During the battle, the second Hokage ordered me to call for Mito Uzumaki, and after I left, the first Hokage finally went all out to suppress the beast with the Sage Art. Gate of the Great God before he used his Sage Art would release, through several thousand hands and leaving that beast no chance to fight back. As for the people it manipulated, they were dispatched one after another by the second Hokage using his Flying Thunder God Jutsu, and he even used the Forbidden Summoning Jutsu, Impure World Reincarnation, to summon many immortal people to help him fend off the assault of these superhumans. And in the end, he succeeded in holding them back long enough until I came back with Lady Mito, where she then used her great sealing techniques, and using the help of Lord Hashirama and Tobirama, they actually succeeded in sealing that beast in the end inside a scroll. Could that scroll still be in the possession of Konoha? And did you find if anyone was behind all of this? Asked Bakurio what mattered the most at the moment, because someone apparently could use similar powers to that beast. Hearing his question, Hiruzen's heart couldn't help but start trembling at the thought of that beast going berserk in the world again, so he quickly said, after a long investigation, we actually found out that the beast was manipulating people from the Hidden Sky Village, but we didn't have any evidence to accuse them of this, as they also said they were simply victims attacked by the beast, not to mention that. When he reached this point, Hiruzen's expression suddenly turned extremely sad as he appeared heartbroken, making the hearts of everyone in the room suddenly start beating faster as they heard him say, after that, Lord Hashirama said that he was going to set on a journey to deal with the source of this evil, but after he came back, he was on the verge of death and left us. One message behind. Wait, didn't you say that grandfather died because of a terrible sickness? Tsunade suddenly started losing her cool as this news was just way beyond her, but her teacher Hiruzen simply shook his head before he said, no, Lord Hashirama was killed, and the last thing he said before dying was to never tell his family about this so that they don't try to seek revenge for him foolishly. Tsunade suddenly broke down crying as she vaguely remembered her grandfather and his kind smile and how sad her grandmother Mito was after his death, prompting Bakurio to approach her and pat her on the back to console her as he heard Hiruzen saying, and the other thing he said was, beware of the darkness in our hearts, huh? Bakurio's eyes suddenly sharpened like never before. I never thought I would hear this warning from Hashirama himself, and to think it could cause someone like him death. This is bad. Everyone in the Hokage's office were left in shock at the thought of something existing beyond the power of the legendary Hashirama, especially after Kurama mentioned how he and Madara combined ended up losing their battle against him. And Kurama's almost unstoppable carnage was still fresh in their minds, to the point that it required the sacrifice of the fourth Hokage along with many capable ninjas. So, for something to cause the death of Hashirama, needless to say, it's probably at the level of a calamity for the world as they know it, and even all the hidden villages combined might not be able to deal with it. Is Kagaya related to this? No, she's sealed away. Why do I feel like the thing hidden in the shadows is even more terrifying than Kagaya? Bakurio couldn't help but feel nervous at the thought of the high-level unknown threat that was targeting him. Still, that beast Hiruzen is talking about is probably the Zero Tails I heard about in my past life. It seems that in whatever Naruto movie it was shown, it was probably nerfed to the max as those movies would often be. Many things are starting to make sense. Maybe the sudden death of Ginkaku and Kinkaku also has something to do with this. I need to be very careful from now on. Bakurio concluded his thoughts before he turned to the broken-hearted Tsunade, and couldn't help but let out a sigh and say, Tsunade, I know you are sad, but I'm sure your grandfather's death wasn't in vain. I feel like he sacrificed himself to remove a huge threat that was targeting this world, so you should be proud of him instead of sad. Tsunade raised her head and looked at the boy that was comforting her, and feeling his tiny hand patting her head made her dumbfounded for a moment as she felt embarrassed, but his words worked their magic as she felt a little bit better when she heard them and said, thank you, before she fell silent again. At this moment, Fugaku shot the two of them a weird look before he turned to Hiruzen and said, Hiruzen, you said that Mito Uzumaki sealed that beast inside a scroll. Do you know where it's located right now? Hiruzen nodded at this before he said, yes, it's hidden inside the top secret vault protected inside the Anbu headquarters alongside the other forbidden jutsu the village collected over the years. Fugaku nodded at him before he said, please go check out if it's still where it's supposed to be. Hiruzen nodded and quickly left the office, prompting Fugaku to turn to Kurama and ask, weren't you sealed inside Mito Uzumaki? How come you know nothing about this? I thought as a tailed beast, you share the senses of your Jinchuriki. Kurama growled at Fugaku as he remembered his dark times when he was sealed inside Mito. That hateful woman used a very strong seal on me that disconnected me completely from the outside world to stop any attempts I could possibly have in e-capping. I see, said Fugaku before he turned his attention to Bakurio and noticed that although he was trying to comfort Tsunade, he actually had a very distant look on his eyes, as if he was looking at the future directly, and for some reason, Fugaku felt worried when he saw that look, so he tried to change the subject. So Bakurio, what brought you here in the first place? Bakurio suddenly snapped out of his thoughts as he was brought back to reality and replied, I came to inform you that I will be leaving for a while. I don't know how long it's going to take, but I will be meeting Jiraiya as I need a favor to ask of him. Tsunade, hearing the mention of her old friend, seemed intrigued by this conversation. Meanwhile, Fugaku said, I see, do you know where he is? Bakurio nodded, yes, I already collected all the information I need, I just came to say goodbye, but I didn't think I would end up getting involved in this mess because of one single spy. Fugaku wasn't surprised by Bakurio already knowing Jiraiya's location since his intelligence network left him speechless a long time ago, so he simply said, what do you think about the involvement of the Land of the Sky in this? You know they tried to attack Konoha during the Second World War. Do you think it's possible that they are more involved with this beast than what they are saying? Bakurio suddenly let out an evil smile as he said, that's a stupid question, Fugaku. There's nothing more tempting than power in a world where fists talks louder than words, so I'm pretty sure no one would say no to that kind of power, including this very same village. Fugaku's eyes suddenly started shining dangerously at the thought of someone trying to release such a dangerous monster for their own selfish reasons inside the village, while Tsunade's heart was slowly getting filled with rage towards the Land of the Sky until a hand suddenly landed on her head again, startling her. What are you doing? Asked Tsunade to the boy that was treating her like a little girl, but he simply shrugged at her and said, don't forget the worlds your grandpa left behind. Burdening your heart with this grudge is not necessary. Tsunade's eyes constricted, seeing how Bakurio easily saw through her, but then he patted her again to her shock and said, leave it to me, I will deal with this mess. Hearing Bakurio say this, Fugaku's eyes suddenly flickered with a trace of sadness as he clenched his fists secretly, but he didn't say anything while Tsunade suddenly remembered something she took lightly once before. A promise this kid in front of her asked her to make, in case I ever disappear, take care of the people close to me. But hearing the weird incident behind her grandfather's death, she couldn't help but think, impossible, could it be that Bakurio was already expecting the beast's existence and maybe even something more behind it? But how? Looking at Bakurio's black eyes that seemed to be hiding many secrets from the world, she suddenly felt her heart constricting at the thought of losing him. But as if he saw through her thoughts again, Bakurio simply smiled at her before he turned to look at Fugaku. Fugaku, how's Itachi's training going? Fugaku immediately understood that Bakurio's was referring to his newly awakened Mangekyo Sharingan and replied, he's training with Shisui to get used to them, hopefully, he will learn how to use them soon. Bakurio nodded. That's good to hear. Just tell him not to overdo it. Fugaku nodded back, clearly understanding the danger of going blind if someone overuses their Mangekyo Sharingan, and while they were having some more small talk, trying to lighten the heavy mood covering the room, Hiruzen finally walked back to the office and said, the scroll is still in place and there doesn't seem to be any abnormalities on that area. Bakurio and Fugaku grew thoughtful at this before the latter said, we can't assume that someone doesn't know how to use dark chakra without that beast. Hiruzen agreed with him and with a thoughtful look he said, we should investigate the Land of SK. I will do it. Interrupted him Tsunade as she suddenly stood up with a strong determination on her face, and Hiruzen decided to refute her as he didn't want to risk his student encountering some trouble beyond her power. Tsunade, we need you here to take care of Konoha's hospital. I will go, I'm old so I can take the risk. No. This is something personal to me. She shot Bakurio a look secretly as she thought. I can't let a kid shoulder my burden. Let her do it, said Bakurio to everyone's surprise, but not before we make some special preparations. He left those special preparations unsaid because Hiruzen was still present in the room and he didn't know about Minato's revival yet. So, Bakurio was planning to let Minato mark her and give her a communication device before she could go investigate what remained of the Land of the Sky. And Fugaku, guessing these thoughts, also agreed. Hiruzen didn't understand what was going on and was about to speak his mind again, but Tsunade simply said, "It's already decided," before she left to make her preparations. Meanwhile, Bakurio also turned to Fugaku and said, "It's also time for me to leave. Let me know if you need anything while I'm away. Although I believe you won't need me with Minato being a Jinchuriki. Right now he's probably unbeatable in this world, probably." Bakurio's eyes kept flickering with unknown thoughts. Fugaku nodded at this and said with an unreadable look on his face, "Goodbye." Outside the village hidden in the leaves, the terrain was filled with forests and greenery. In the legends, it was said that the first Hokage used his wood release to create this terrain. But not many people in this day and age still believe those rumors. After all, humans don't like imagining a person having such an unachievable level of strength that they could never attain. But the kid and the fox traveling believed those legends as they each experienced the power of that legendary ninja in their own ways. "So brat, what do you want to find the toad sage for?" asked Kurama as he followed behind Bakurio, who was traveling toward the Land of Rivers. He gathered enough information from Jiraiya himself before he went back in time, and he understood that Jiraiya was investigating the Land of Rivers because one of his spies spotted Orochimaru somewhere in here wearing the Akatsuki uniform, so he went to investigate it to confirm this dangerous news. However, he would never have expected that Orochimaru was building a whole hidden village in the Land of Sound that's to the north of the Land of Fire. "I need him because I want to become a sage," replied Bakurio without stopping as he jumped from tree to tree at a very high speed, but Kurama kept up with him like a phantom in his miniature form and said, "Kid, becoming a sage is no easy feat. How many people in history do you think can become sages? I know it's hard, and believe me, what I'm attempting isn't to become a simple toad sage. I want to become something more. I want to achieve the same thing Hashirama achieved," replied Bakurio with determination in his eyes as he recalled the unique sage transformation Hashirama had. There were no animal traits in his sage transformation like Naruto's eyes becoming that of a toad or Kabuto transforming into a pale piece of shit with a tail and horns. Hashirama only had markings covering his face and that's all. Kurama was startled at this kid's knowledge of Hashirama, but then he got intrigued at the high hopes of this kid and said, "Where do you get the confidence of reaching that level?" Bakurio shot Kurama a mysterious smile as he thought, "Of course I'm not going to tell you about Asura's chakra," and this prompted a snort from Kurama as they continued on their way to the Land of Rivers, which is coincidentally where the first Akatsuki hideout is located, and Kurama couldn't wait to see the look on the Bakurio's face when he fails miserably. But suddenly they found someone waiting ahead in front of them, taking a long gulp from his drink as he said, "Yo, where are you guys going without me?" Bakurio's eyes widened a little before a slight smile appeared on his face as he gained a new companion for this trip. It was Mukai. Meanwhile, back at Konoha, Fugaku invited Minato for a very secret meeting that only had 5 members attending it. This included the 2 of them along with Hiruzen, Shikaku, and Hiashi. Fugaku's relationship with Hiashi grew closer thanks to Bakurio acting like a bridge to shorten the gap between the Hyuga and the Uchiha, and during the past time, they grew even closer and some mutual trust was starting to form between them. The details of this meeting never left this room, but the actions that were made after it were terrifying to say the least, because during that same day, all of the spies on the list that Bakurio gave them vanished into thin air, which was a devastating loss to the hidden villages they belonged to. But what was disappointing is that no traces of that last spy were ever found, which left a dark cloud looming over Konoha. And once the news of the disappearance of their spies reached the various hidden villages, the reactions were different. Shock, worry, anger, this was just a sample of what the various cages were experiencing, seeing the sudden aggressive move that Konoha made, leaving them wondering if the good old days of the passive Konoha were over or not. Meanwhile, as Bakurio was on his way to the Land of Rivers and with the addition of Mukai to his journey, Inside a cave, a cloud of smoke suddenly exploded and from it came out Jiraiya with a very dark look and a face full of worry. If Bakurio was here, he would understand immediately that this was the effect of the reverse summoning jutsu. So, Jiraiya had probably just come back from Mount Myoboku. Mount Myoboku was the legendary habitat of toads. It was a holy land rich in nature energy and was the place of residence of the great toad sage, a toad that, 1,000 years ago witnessed Kagaya enslaving the population of the world with the infinite Tsukuyomi, and then he relayed this information to her two sons Hagoromo and Hamura, which begun their huge fight against their mother. So, this toad played a huge role in the current situation of the world, but his role didn't stop there, as he also has an innate ability to predict the future and his prophecies were rarely inaccurate. And the last prophecy known to be told from him was the one to Jiraiya that said, firstly, that he would go on to become both a talented ninja and a pervert without equal. Jiraiya would walk across the world as a sage, observing all creation, watching as nature takes its course, and in doing so he would also write a book. Jiraiya was also told that he would one day have a student with the power to save or destroy the world, and that it would be Jiraiya's actions that will determine which path this student takes. But now, this usually laid-back great toad sage suddenly had a new prophecy, and with an urgent tone in his voice that was never seen before, he quickly called for the two toad sages Fukasaku and his wife Shima. Fukasaku, Shima quickly informed that kid Jiraiya to visit me as soon as possible. The situation is urgent. Great Honorable Geezer, what's wrong? Asked Fukasaku nervously, as in his 800 years of life, he never saw the great toad sage acting this scared. The world is going to witness big changes. Call that brat Jiraiya quickly. I have a new prophecy, said the great toad sage as he tried to calm himself down, but it was to no avail. Fukasaku shot his wife a look telling to comfort the sage before he quickly used the reverse summoning jutsu to inform Jiraiya about this weird incident, and Jiraiya quickly followed him back to Mount Myoboku with no hesitation. What could be happening? Said Jiraiya, recalling the always calm and slightly senile great toad sage, and couldn't help but start feeling worried. He quickly arrived at the hall where the great toad sage sat on his huge chair, and Jiraiya quickly sensed the air of nervousness in the room. Is the situation really that bad? Thought Jiraiya before he said, Great toad sage, you asked for my presence. Asked Jiraiya, and he quickly received a response. Jiraiya, the future has been changed, and I have a new prediction. I will leave you the choice to act after you hear it. Said the great toad sage, and Jiraiya nodded calmly while his mind worked at full speed. A darkness that has been peeking at our world from behind the curtain for ages is finally going to show itself, and a boy with the power to control death with his eyes is going to greet it. And the survival or destruction of this world would all lie in his hands. And this same boy, you are going to encounter him soon, accompanied by a man and a fox. Jiraiya, hearing this ominous prophecy, finally couldn't hold back his curiosity and asked, What's this darkness you are talking about? But the great toad sage simply shook his head before he said, I have no answer for this question, but maybe the boy you are going to meet can clear your doubts. Who's this boy? Wondered Jiraiya as he started leaving Mount Myoboku with more doubts than what he came in with. While Jiraiya was wondering who the boy in the prophecy is, the boy himself was unaware that his presence in the world has caused such a huge change to the point that the great toad sage would have a prophecy about him. And it wasn't a happy one. And their expected meeting didn't take long to occur, as Bakurio, who was accompanied by Kurama and Mukai, finally crossed the border of the land of fire and entered the land of rivers. Afterward, Bakurio stopped for a second and took out a map to check their current location, which prompted Mukai to ask him, Where do we go now? Bakurio looked at Mukai, who throughout the journey didn't ask any questions regarding Kurama, as if he didn't care at all, and after confirming their location in the map he said, Jiraiya is probably searching the natural caverns in the land of rivers, but it's impossible for one person to search them all, and according to my knowledge, he frequents a shop called Curry of Life shop that's near the Katabami gold mine, so that's going to be our destination. Grr, I can't wait to eat there, said Kurama with an excited look on his face before he laid down on Bakurio's shoulder while his stomach kept screaming in anticipation. And at their incredible traveling speed, it didn't take long for them to arrive at their destination. Entering the Curry of Life shop, Bakurio couldn't help but vaguely remember that this shop was mentioned in the anime, but he couldn't remember the exact details of it as it was a long time ago. Well, there's no point in thinking about this right now, thought Bakurio, who was soon interrupted from his thoughts as the owner of the shop. An old woman called Sancho greeted them. Sancho was a short woman with white hair, she was wearing a beige-colored hat. And two large strands of her hair hang down below each side of her face. She also wears a large pair of glasses, and she was the creator of this legendary curry of life which interested Bakurio. "Oh, we have quite a few guests today." Karashi welcomed them in. Sancho was surprised by the strangers, but she welcomed them kindly even though it was quite the weird mix. A guy in his 30s, a child, and a fox entering a restaurant. This is more likely to be a premise for a joke than for it to actually happen. "Okay mom, please have a seat dear guests. Our specialty here is curry. How do you like it, mild, hot, or extra hot?" replied Karashi, who's a teenage boy around 12 years old and was helping his mother manage the curry of life shop. Bakurio shot Mukai and Kurama a mischievous look that sent chills down their spine before he double-checked his physical and vitality attributes and replied politely as they sat down on a table. "Please bring us 3 servings of the hottest curry you can make. I'm intrigued to see what this curry of life is all about." Karashi was surprised as he asked, "You mean the fox will eat too?" And he couldn't help but look at Kurama curiously. "Yes, he can't wait to taste this curry, right Kurama?" Kurama reluctantly nodded. While inside he was thinking, what's this kid trying to do? But Mukai wasn't as polite as him and immediately complained, "Can I change my order please?" "No, you can't," quickly replied Bakurio with an evil smile, shutting down any of his hopes. And seeing this comical interaction, the old woman Sancho couldn't help but let out a chuckle as she said, "Ha ha ha ha. Kid, you won't regret your decision. My curry will give you a lot of energy. I'm going to take a walk. I don't want to smoke in this fine shop," said Mukai, and was about to stand up and make a run for it, but a tail suddenly landed on his shoulder and it felt like a small hill was put over him even to the strong Mukai, and he immediately turned to look at its owner, Kurama, who had a look on his face that said, "I'm not going to suffer on my own here. Damn you tailed beast, how could you drag me down with you like this?" As Mukai for the first time in his life wanted to beat the living hell out of a fox. Well, it seems like the shop is quite lively today." A voice suddenly traveled from the outside and it put a serious expression on Mukai's face as he didn't sense the presence of this man before his voice rang out. "Oh, Jiraiya-san, you are here today. Welcome welcome. I'm preparing a new batch of the curry of life for my new guests, come join them," replied Sancho cheerfully when she saw her regular guest Jiraiya. "That's good to hear," said Jiraiya as he stood at the door of the shop casting a long shadow inside thanks to his huge frame. Jiraiya was a tall and well-built middle-aged man with fair skin. He had waist-length, spiky white hair that was tied back into a ponytail, with 2 shoulder-length bangs framing his face. There were red lines under his eyes which extended further down his face as he got older, going all the way to the bottom by the time he was an adult. Now that he's middle-aged, he developed wrinkles around the corners of his mouth and a wart on the left side of his nose, probably from his failed sage transformation. He was wearing a green short shirt, kimono and matching pants, under which he wore mesh armor that is visible at his wrists and ankles. He also wore handguards, a black belt, traditional Japanese wooden sandals, and a red haori with 2 yellow circles on each side, and he wore a horned forehead protector with the kanji for oil, which denoted his affiliation with Mount Myoboku. "Thank God he didn't lie to me during the war. I can't think of where I need to go to find this pervert sage," thought Bakurio as he glanced at Jiraiya, who was approaching them with a relaxed smile, but he knew what he was feeling inside was far from relaxation as he seemed anxious, especially when he laid his eyes on him. This guy in the black clothing's troublesome. He's pretending not to care about my presence, but he's on guard and ready to attack me at any instant," thought Jiraiya as he gave Mukai a passing look which the latter simply ignored and was also analyzing him secretly while thinking, "This guy might push me to the limit if I fight him. Really worthy of being a legendary character. This is." Jiraiya suddenly looked at the fox that was putting his tail on Mukai, seemingly holding him in place. "Don't tell me. Does Konoha know about this?" Jiraiya's heart was shaken as he clearly understood that he was facing the monster that terrorized his village, but even now his expression didn't break at all. That was until he laid his eyes on the boy that was sitting opposite to the man clothed in black. "This, a boy with a man and fox, don't tell me this is the kid from the prophecy." Jiraiya's expression finally broke as he stared at the kid that somehow changed the destiny of the world, and to his surprise, the kid suddenly said, "Have a seat, Jiraiya, I've been searching for you." "He knows me." Jiraiya was startled as he looked at the boy in front of him seriously before he sat down and asked, "Who are you? Why are you acting anxious? This is unlike you, plus don't worry, we are friends from Konoha. This is Mukai, a former Anbu, and this fox I'm sure you recognized already. As for me, I'm Bakurio Uchiha," said Bakurio with a calm smile while inside, his mind was racing. Why's Jiraiya acting like this? When we talked in the other timeline he wasn't like this. "Bakurio, you are the kid that fought Danzo. Why are you searching for me?" Jiraiya suddenly recalled the recent top-secret information he received from Hiruzen regarding the changes that were happening in the village and finally understood who this kid is. "The food is ready," yelled Sancho from her small kitchen, prompting Bakurio to shoot Jiraiya a deep look before he said, "Let's eat first," before he shot both Mukai, who was gulping down his saliva in fear, and Kurama, who was both nervous and excited, an evil look. "This is going to be fun." Mukai and Kurama kept staring at the black curry in front of them nervously as it kept bubbling like some kind of concoction made by a witch. Meanwhile, Bakurio too started regretting his decision of ordering this crazy dish. "Curry of life, my ass, this curry is a ticket to the afterlife. My Yomi no Kuni was probably named after it, tch. The trio kept staring at each other, no one making the first move, and Jiraiya got intrigued by this, so he said, "Don't judge it by its appearance. This curry's really delicious and it won't kill you, so don't worry." The moment he finished saying this, Jiraiya picked up his spoon and took a bite of this curry with a smug smile on his face, belittling the fear of those around him. "See, it's Oka." Jiraiya was about to brag some more, but suddenly he froze mid-sentence and his face started turning beet red before it turned completely pale, and he fell face first on the table and started muttering, "SS Sancho-san, what's wrong with today's curry? Oh, I made it extra hot as the little boy wanted. Enjoy, this will give you a lot of strength." Sancho replied enthusiastically, but the rest of the people sitting at the table didn't share her excitement at all, and Mukai swallowed hard before he quickly decided to use this opportunity against Bakurio, who also seemed hesitant. "Bakurio, how about you try it first and tell us how it tastes? This bastard's trying to use me as his sacrificial lamb, but still, I'm really going to be okay if I eat this? Even Jiraiya didn't survive it." Bakurio took a deep look at the curry bubbling in front of him before his eyes suddenly flickered and said, "Yo, Kurama, you must be quite hungry, quick try it." "No, Kurama tried to refute, but the moment he opened his mouth, Bakurio manipulated a chakra string and smacked him with his own dish, resulting in most of the curry entering his mouth immediately, while Bakurio quickly covered his face expecting the worst. How cruel, thought Mukai as he decided it's better if he doesn't let down his guard around Bakurio in the future, while Jiraiya, that was half dead, kept admiring his chakra manipulating skills. This kid is talented. However, as they were each having their own thoughts, Kurama suddenly froze for an instant as his eyes dilated, clearly speechless by the unknown sensations he was experiencing, but then suddenly he opened his mouth, causing all of them to become serious, expecting him to shoot fire from his mouth or something. But the exact opposite happened as his eyes started twinkling and he said, "That was so tasty. Another serving please." "Huh? Are you serious?" said Mukai before he remembered that this little fox beside him could probably withstand his strongest attack with its bare body and not even flinch. "This is really the tailed fox," thought Jiraiya, who already recovered but kept pretending to be dead just so he could observe them without getting suspected. "See Mukai, Kurama can do it and so can you. Go ahead, have a bite," said Bakurio with an evil smile, to which Mukai responded with a challenging one and said, "Let's take a bite at the same time if you dare." Bakurio narrowed his eyes at him before he accepted the challenge with a nod and said, "Why wouldn't I? Let's go at the count of 3. 1, said Bakurio as they both picked up their spoons. 2, they both scooped up a similar amount of curry using all of their experience and mastery so that no one gets the advantage over the other before they brought them near their mouths, and Bakurio ended the count. 3. Both their eyes were full of determination as they put that spoon of deadly curry in their mouths and kept staring at each other the whole time. That's when they both noticed something: no one swallowed the curry. "This bastard, I knew it, he was going to play it dirty. thought Mukai as his tongue started burning and stinging while looking at the boy in front of him that was only frowning and seemed to be doing well tolerating this amount of pain. This guy's not easy to trick. I should, however, Bakurio couldn't even finish his thought before suddenly Kurama yelled, "Stop wasting time, you two idiots," and he directly slapped them both with his tails, forcing them to guard it, but they swallowed that curry in the process. And that's when the hellfire started burning their whole bodies. I won't forget this, Kurama, thought Bakurio as he started experiencing what's like to be burned by Amaterasu from the inside out. Both he and Mukai started spitting fire from their mouths before they fell face first on the table. "TCH, you humans are weak," said Kurama in a condescending tone before he started eating all of their curries, and a close to death Bakurio ended up saying, "Oh old lady, can you bring us 3 servings of some mild curry please? You can give the rest of that poison to the fox." Sure, replied Sancho as she started preparing a normal batch while Bakurio started to slowly recover. "Man, I should coat my kune with this curry. I can't imagine what the result would be. What do you think, Mukai?" "That's a great idea," replied Mukai with a thoughtful look on his face, clearly considering this idea for real. "Is this really the kid from the prophecy?" thought Jiraiya before he decided to stop pretending and asked directly, "So, why are you searching for me?" Bakurio shot him a look before he took a sip of a cup of water and replied, "I want to learn how to control nature chakra from you and achieve sage mode." Jiraiya was surprised by this weird request. "Kid, do you think anyone can master such a thing?" "Well, I'm not anyone and I believe I can master it, yes," replied Bakurio with a shrug, but Jiraiya could sense endless confidence emanating from this casual gesture. Is this kid really serious? But I think it's helpful if I take him to Mount Myoboku and maybe the great toad sage can predict his future and find the reason for that ominous prophecy. Jiraiya, you've been drowning in your thoughts since the moment you laid your eyes on me. Care to explain what's going on? Seeing that Jiraiya kept thinking a lot before every answer he gave, Bakurio decided to ask him this with a piercing look, and Jiraiya felt like someone was staring at his deepest secrets. This boy might be as perspective as Minato, thought Jiraiya before he let out a sigh and replied, "I'm sure since you came to find me then it means you know what I'm trying to do here in the land of rivers, so I will skip the boring explanation." Bakurio nodded at him and started listening seriously to what could cause so much worry in the heart of this great man. "Just before you guys arrived here, I was summoned back to Mount Myoboku by the great toad sage who's the leader of all the toads there, and the reason I was summoned is because he predicted that the fate of the world has changed, and the one responsible for that change was a boy with a fox and man." Once he reached this point, Jiraiya kept examining the boy in front of him and noticed that the laid-back look on his eyes suddenly started changing into something complicated before it turned into a blank look and he couldn't read anything from it anymore, so he decided to continue speaking. "The great toad sage said that the boy who wields the power of death is going to face the darkness and that the survival or destruction of the world will be in his hands," finished Jiraiya as a terrible silence fell on the shop and Mukai and Kurama kept staring at Bakurio waiting for his response. "I never thought the toad would actually predict my future. And this darkness again." Bakurio suddenly fell into deep contemplation and Mukai noticed something that sent a shiver down his spine. Bakurio's reaction to hearing such ominous news was a faint smile as he replied, "When we start our training in nature's chakra I want to meet this great toad sage. What's this kid planning?" Mukai understood one thing for sure, whatever hid behind that faint smile was a terrifying monster and it was ready to bare its fangs to the world. Outside the Curry of Life shop, 3 humans and a fox were conversing after having had their fill of some normal tasting curry. Bakurio ended up paying an enormous bill thanks to the amount the glutton fox had eaten. "So, this mountain is the Katabami gold mine, huh?" muttered Bakurio while looking at the mountain that was facing the Curry of Life shop. "That's correct. It's one of the biggest gold mines in the land of rivers," replied Jiraiya when he overheard Bakurio, and it made a weird glint pass through his eyes. "It seems like I will visit the land of rivers more than I thought in the future." Bakurio, normally you would require a contract with a toad to be able to reverse summon yourself to Mount Myoboku, but we are going to use another way. Follow me, said Jiraiya before he started walking to an isolated place. Summoning contracts, huh? I wonder why not many people use them for escaping. This always perplexed Bakurio, as in the anime, many events could have been avoided if the people used the reverse summoning jutsu. After Bakurio did some research on the summoning jutsu, he found that there are two types. The commonly used type is when people make a contract with an individual animal or item. For example, the contract Sasuke had with his hawk, or the one the 7 ninja swordsmen of the mist have with their swords so that they can summon them at any time. Bakurio's contract with the Rashomon gates also falls under this category, and unless these things exist in the real world and can contain the person, the reverse summoning jutsu won't work with them. For example, a weapon that is sealed inside a scroll. But if that same weapon could contain a person, and it was located somewhere in the real world, the user can hide inside it and will be transported along with the weapon when the summoning is undone, and the same principle applies to animals. As for the second type of summoning, which is much rarer, and that's to make a contract with a location and its species. This is the case with Jiraiya's contract with Mount Myoboku. This type of contract is so versatile as it allows the user to summon multiple animals at the same time from the location they made the contract with, and it all depends on the amount of chakra they use. But not anyone can land their hands on this kind of contract, especially with a sentient being such as the toads of Mount Myoboku or the snakes of Ryachi Cave. That's why Bakurio suspected that Jiraiya's family name held a lot of meaning, and it wasn't left unsaid for no reason. Even after searching around, he found nothing about it. Could he really be a survivor of the Hagoromo clan? Thought Bakurio as he followed behind Jiraiya and remembered the history he researched. During the war-torn era that preceded the creation of the hidden villages, the Land of Fire witnessed a major alliance at that time, and surprisingly it was between the Uchiha clan and the Hagoromo clan. The Uchiha clan doesn't really need any introductions for their abilities, but the Hagoromo clan were actually famous for using toad summons to help them in their fights. And this alliance caused many losses to the Senju clan that only stopped when they made an alliance with the Uzumaki clan and evened out the battle again. However, Bakurio found that the fate of the Hagoromo clan was somehow obscured and he couldn't find more details about them after this, only that in the current time, only Jiraiya had the ability to summon toads, and it wasn't like he grew up without parents, so he guessed that some kind of internal fight happened between the Uchiha at that time and the Hagoromo clan, which resulted in the latter taking massive losses. But the Uchiha didn't escape from these losses unscathed, and they ended up leading a final charge against the Senju and Uzumaki alliance, which they lost in the end, and after some drama, they also joined the alliance that became the village hidden in the leaves. Although, the Uzumaki clan's base wasn't relocated and they remained in the Land of Whirlpools to the east of the Land of Fire. As for the survivors of the Hagoromo clan, Bakurio believes that they lost most of their heritage, and fearing that the Uchiha and the Senju might still hold a grudge against them, they decided to not pass down their famous toad summoning jutsu anymore. Yet surprisingly, while Hiruzen was teaching Jiraiya about the summoning and reverse summoning jutsu, he actually never expected that the latter would use it carelessly, and because he had no summon contract at the time. When he used the reverse summoning jutsu, he actually ended up in Mount Myoboku. So Bakurio concluded that his bloodline was definitely related to the Hagoromo clan, making him a descendant of the legendary sage who was also related to the toads. Who would have thought? This pervert is a descendant of Hagoromo, thought Bakurio in wonder, until Jiraiya suddenly stopped in front of an empty clearing and said, "I guess this place would do just fine." Then he bit his finger and put his hand on the ground, causing many seals to extend from it, summoning jutsu. A huge puff of smoke exploded in front of their faces and after it vanished. A dull, rusty red enormous frog with brighter red markings around his chest, eyes, and lips and a scar over his left eye appeared, and it was wearing a large blue vest that has the kanji ebi toad on the back and was carrying a massive dosu blade at his hip and a kaizaru pipe which he often smokes. Bakurio immediately recognized that this was Jiraiya's famous summon, Gamabunta, so it come as no surprise to him when this ill-tempered toad, who's the chief toad of Mount Myoboku, said in annoyance to Jiraiya, "Jiraiya, what did you summon me here for? Yo old friend, I need you to do me a favor and take us back to Mount Myoboku," said Jiraiya before his face turned serious and said, "I found the boy from the prophecy, huh?" Gamabunta's face suddenly froze as he shot Mukai and Bakurio a look before he made eye contact with the fox that was sitting on Bakurio's shoulder, and he felt his heart shake when he sensed the immense chakra it contained. "Jiraiya, what's that dangerous fox doing here?" yelled Gamabunta as he quickly leapt back and started drawing his blade. "Don't worry, he was set free for a reason." said Jiraiya, who understood Kurama's situation after Bakurio told him how he unsealed him from Naruto and Fugaku and Hiruzen approved of it. So, he decided to trust in their judgment. Grr, what a cowardly frog, said Kurama with a smug smile on his face, which prompted Mukai to shoot him a weird look, but then he noticed Bakurio signaling him. Why do you have to drag me into this mess? Thought Mukai helplessly before he looked at Gamabunta with a contemptuous look and said, TCH, indeed, I never expected these animals to be so cowardly. Bastards, what did you say? Provoked, Gamabunta swung his sword at Mukai with a quick swing. Stop, Gam. Jiraiya tried to stop him, but he was simply too late and the sword soon connected with the ground, creating a huge fissure as everyone jumped away from it and Gamabunta quickly retracted it ready for another swing. However, Mukai's annoying voice soon reached its ears again. See, not to mention that fox, you can't even handle me. Gamabunta quickly turned around and looked at his sword and found Mukai was squatting down on it and looking at him smugly. You. Gamabunta was about to unleash a fireball at him, but Jiraiya finally started to get angry and yelled at him, Bunta, stop right now. Seeing the serious look on Jiraiya's face, Gamabunta struggled as he really wanted to smack the smug idiot standing on his sword, but in the end, he decided to give Jiraiya some face. Jiraiya, these guys are dangerous, I can't let you take them to Mount Myoboku, said Gamabunta as he started to swing his sword around to shake Mukai out from it, but he kept sticking to it like glue, which annoyed the frog to no end. What an amazing mastery of his body and chakra control. That guy is a taijutsu master, thought Jiraiya while looking at Mukai, who was doing something miraculous so effortlessly before he calmly jumped and landed beside Bakurio, who was watching the fun from a hill nearby. Don't worry, I will take responsibility for it, said Jiraiya, which finally made Gamabunta give up as he said, fine, suit yourself. His friendship with Jiraiya was long enough to know that he was smart enough to not bring harm easily to his friend, so he decided to trust him. Meanwhile, Bakurio shot Kurama a helpless look before he said, you really are troublesome to carry around. And you are troublesome to be around, thought Mukai while looking at Bakurio helplessly, who was the definition of the pot calling the kettle black. What can I do? I'm just too great for these people, said Kurama both jokingly and in irony to his situation. Heaving a sigh, Bakurio decided to be mindful of his words in the future and walked towards Gamabunta, who was observing him closely. So, how are we going to do this? Jiraiya shot them a mischievous look and said, unfortunately, it's going to be a slimy trip. And Gamabunta started opening his mouth the moment Jiraiya finished, disgusting the trio and causing them to lament their fate. Seriously. Coming out of Gamabunta's mouth. Bakurio, Mukai, and Kurama couldn't enjoy the mesmerizing scene that Mount Myoboku had to offer, as they were disgusted by the slimy saliva that was covering their bodies, and the first thing Bakurio did was to cast multiple water jutsu on himself just to watch his body, and Kurama and Mukai quickly joined him. That was the most disgusting thing I have ever done, said Mukai while drinking from his jug, almost finishing it in one mouthful just to forget this disgusting scene forever. Welcome to Mount Myoboku, said Jiraiya with a grin, enjoying the miserable state they were in. After all, he didn't need to go through the same procedure and simply reverse summoned himself here. After Bakurio felt a little bit cleaner, he finally started observing this famous location that very few people laid foot on. So this is Mount Myoboku, huh? It really looks like a large-scale toad's habitat. Bakurio kept staring at the huge mushrooms and the weird structures around him shaped like curved upside-down cones, and seeing that they had holes and some toads were peeking from them. Bakurio concluded that these must be the houses in which the smaller toads lived. What a weird place and architecture. This is really far from any of my expectations, thought Bakurio before he turned to Jiraiya and said, should we go meet the great toad sage? Jiraiya was surprised by how quickly Bakurio recovered from the environment of Mount Myoboku. This kid really knows how to keep his cool. Meanwhile, Jiraiya couldn't help but shoot a look at Kurama, who was running around, and Mukai, who was shamelessly knocking on the different houses and asking if they could help fill his jug. Letting out a sigh, he said, my two teachers are coming here soon. We will go meet the great toad sage after we see them. He's talking about those two little frogs, huh? Thought Bakurio with narrowed eyes before he replied. Sure. Not long after, Jiraiya's teacher Fukasaku came running when he heard the arrival of the boy from the prophecy. Why is he here so quickly, and what's that idiot Jiraiya thinking bringing these troublesome people here? muttered Fukasaku with a worried look on his face. Meanwhile, his wife Shima went to inform the great toad sage. After he arrived, he saw the weird trio getting reprimanded by Jiraiya as the residents of Mount Myoboku kept looking at them hatefully from their houses, and he could hear a boy complaining to Jiraiya with an annoyed look, "Jiraiya, why are you reprimanding me too? I didn't do anything." But Jiraiya simply snorted at him and said, "You brought them with you, so you are going to take responsibility for their actions." The boy was about to argue again, but he suddenly noticed Fukasaku was observing them and stopped and turned to look at him, which prompted Jiraiya to turn around too and said, "Yo, teacher, how are yo?" However, before he could even finish, Fukasaku jumped in the air and punched him in the head, causing a huge bump to appear on it. "Why did you hit me?" said Jiraiya with a pained look, and Fukasaku immediately started lecturing him. "You idiot, do you even think before you act? What did you bring these people here for? And you even brought this hateful fox. Grr, watch your words or I will eat you, little frog." Kurama stared at Fukasaku coldly, which made the latter tremble in fear of being in the presence of the strongest tailed beast. This is bad. If a fight happens here, the damage and casualties would be disastrous, thought Fukasaku nervously, but Jiraiya's voice calmed him down as he explained the situation. "Don't worry, teacher. Nothing will happen. And I brought the kid here because he wanted to meet the great toad sage and see if he could read his future and maybe find a solution to that darkness." "Huh. Well, I guess that's not a bad idea, but you could have brought him alone," replied Fukasaku, still not convinced. "I was going to, but he also wanted to train to be a sage and it might take some time, so I decided to bring his friends with us too," said Jiraiya, which finally made Fukasaku realize. This kid must have realized the huge danger he's in, since the fate of the whole world is in his hands according to the prophecy, so he's probably trying to get stronger as soon as possible. But Fukasaku suddenly shook his head regretfully as he said, "Jiraiya, even you and that brat Minato couldn't master Sage Mode. You think this kid can master it?" "I don't know. We will have to see when he starts training," replied Jiraiya, not giving Fukasaku any false hopes. And just when they were talking, Shima approached them, and seeing that everything was peaceful, she heaved a sigh of relief and said, "The great toad sage said he wants to meet the boy. It seems like you really didn't come with ill intentions. Otherwise the great toad sage wouldn't have accepted to meet you," said Fukasaku while heaving a sigh of relief, and Bakurio simply shrugged at him and said, "Why would I? I have no enmity with you guys." Finding what he said logical, Fukasaku nodded at him before he turned to Kurama and Mukai and said nervously, "Jiraiya, take care of these two for now. We will be back with the boy later." "Sure. Don't worry, teacher," replied Jiraiya before he turned to Kurama and Mukai and said, "Follow me. I will take you on a tour of Mount Myoboku and get you some of its specialties to eat and drink." Kurama and Mukai's eyes immediately lit up as they started following Jiraiya while completely ignoring Bakurio, bringing some dark lines to his face. "These bastards." Then he let out a sigh and said to the two elderly frogs, "Let's go." And they quickly led him to a large hall that's lined with what appears to be giant scrolls, with a huge chair in the middle, and sitting on it was the enormous great toad sage Gamamaru. He is brown in color, with a white belly, and has very wrinkled skin from his old age that surpassed 1,000 years. He wears a professor's hat with tassels and an orb on top of it. He also wears a necklace with the Toad's village symbol for oil on it. And he sits in a shallow pool of water that has the kanji for sage inscribed on it. Bakurio stared at the squinting eyes of this old toad that appeared to be blind before he heard him speak. "Boy, you want me to make a divination for you, right?" Bakurio narrowed his eyes at him and almost said, "No, I want to get naked and dance with you." Stop saying the obvious, but he held himself back from mocking this toad and replied, "Yes, I heard you can predict a person's future, and mine in particular seems to be hiding quite the adventure." The toad sage started laughing. "Ha ha ha. I wouldn't call it an adventure, more like a terrible danger for you and the whole world." Bakurio's eyes narrowed even more before he said, "Well, tell me then, what secrets can your vision peer into?" And at the same time, Bakurio used his appraisal ability on this toad, which made the great toad sage suddenly freeze as his eyes opened wide and stared at Bakurio. "Kid, when you learn how to see, you can control what people see about you," said the great toad sage with a wise tone, which left Fukasaku and Shima bewildered. But Bakurio had an ugly look on his face as he looked at the panel that appeared in front of him when he used his appraisal ability, name, level, race, skills. For the first time when he appraised a living being, nothing appeared, and he knew it wasn't because the toad was too strong but because he was interfering with his ability somehow, and Bakurio couldn't help but think, if this guy can interfere with one of my abilities, wouldn't other people be able to do the same if they had an ability that counters mine? Bakurio suddenly felt his heart shaken as his save and load ability may become ineffective in the future if he fights someone that can manipulate time. But he was suddenly broken from his thoughts as the great toad sage suddenly said, "Impossible, my vision can't predict your future anymore. What did you do, kid?" "Huh? What are you talking about?" "I didn't do anything," replied Bakurio, equally surprised, and the great toad sage could see that he was telling the truth. "This is bad," muttered the great toad sage. Meanwhile, in an unknown location forgotten by the world and hidden by darkness, two bloody orbs started shining in it before a voice slowly muttered, "A little frog in a well, unaware that he's only looking at the sky I made for him, ha 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 ha." Was the great toad sage's vision ever his own? Or was it granted by someone else? Seeing how the great toad sage lost his future vision when he tried to predict his future and how panicked he seemed to be for losing such a defining ability of his life, Bakurio's eyes couldn't help but start flickering coldly. Two kids fought their own mother because of this little frog, and after it, the huge rivalry between the descendants of one of the brothers continued for more than 1,000 years. And even before that, this world was always plagued with wars. Was all of this really a coincidence? No, not when someone can actually absorb negative emotions. Bakurio felt that this darkness mentioned in the first prophecy wasn't a simple being. I can't trust this prophecy anymore. Now that I think about it, wasn't the prophecy he gave to Jiraiya wrong? And in the end, the child of prophecy turned out to be not Nagato nor Minato, it was Naruto. Saying that I hold the power to save or destroy the world in my hands. It's probably trying to make me think that I'm already strong enough. TCH, too bad for you, I know what monsters like Kagaya and her sons could do. The machinations inside Bakurio's head started rotating at a terrifying speed as he started to have an idea of the nature of his hidden enemy, but nothing appeared on his face as he said to the panicked toad that was being comforted by Fukasaku and Shima, "I will excuse myself then, if you ever regain your vision, we will talk at that time." Before he turned around and left, leaving behind him the great toad sage's nervous voice repeating in a panicked voice, "I'm blind. I'm blind." After that incident with Gamamaru, the toads weren't as welcoming to Bakurio, thinking that he was the one that did something to the great toad sage which resulted in him losing his vision. So, he ended up leaving Mount Myoboku without having the chance to learn anything in it. "Sorry Bakurio, I couldn't do anything to convince them to let you stay," said Jiraiya with an apologetic look on his face. He suspected that the darkness in the prophecy had something to do with this. "It's fine Jiraiya, it's not your fault. I wasn't intending to stay there anyways," said Bakurio with a smile, and the surprised Jiraiya couldn't help but ask, "Why? Wasn't your purpose to learn Sage Mode there? You really think this kid has such low goals?" said Kurama in disdain. "What do you mean?" asked Jiraiya with some seriousness in his voice, and Mukai replied to him with a shrug while pointing at Bakurio. "This kid wants to learn the best version of Sage Mode possible and not a mere animal transformation. He said it was something achieved by the first Hokage, Hashirama Senju." Jiraiya's mouth suddenly opened wide and he couldn't help but shake his head at Bakurio before he said, "Kid, according to what I know, Hashirama's Sage Mode was indeed a high-level one, but it's still an animal transformation, only that it was an internal one, so it wasn't apparent as much as mine." "Huh? What do you mean?" Bakurio tilted his head as for the first time in a while, he found his conjecture inaccurate and felt like he was about to get schooled. "Well, do you know about Shikatsu, Damp Bone Forest?" asked Jiraiya with an amused smile, and Bakurio replied with a nod while hearing the giggles of Kurama and Mukai in the background. "That's where Tsunade's summon, Katsuyu resides, right?" continued Bakurio, and Jiraiya nodded before he said, "The first Hokage trained his Sage Mode there, huh? Slug Sage Mode." Bakurio was dumbfounded as Mukai and Kurama finally couldn't hold back and started laughing at him directly. "You actually wanted to be a slug? Ahahaha." Bakurio felt like an idiot for aspiring so high as he heard Jiraiya explain to him. "You see, Not many people know about sage transformations because they aren't something easy to train, and according to the knowledge bestowed to me by my teachers, there are many sage transformations depending on the sacred grounds the user trains in, which grants different abilities. At this point, started raising one finger at a time as he explained, training at Mount Myoboku grants you the Toad Sage transformation, which focuses on enhancing strength. Training at Raichi Cave grants you the Snake Sage transformation, which focuses on enhancing agility. And finally, training at Shikatsu Forest grants the Slug transformation, which focuses on enhancing vitality. Bakurio shot the two bastards, laughing at him an angry look before he said, "You mean Hashirama's incredible regeneration comes from this sage transformation? But this doesn't explain why he didn't have animal features. According to my knowledge, he did have them at first, but they went away as time passed and he became better at controlling nature's energy until they ended up manifesting as dark markings and nothing more," replied Jiraiya with admiration in his eyes, as even he couldn't master a normal sage transformation, not to mention an enhanced version of it like Hashirama's that became part of him, and his crazy vitality lasted to this day with people doing research with his body. "There goes my high aspirations down the drain," said Bakurio with a sigh, but Jiraiya suddenly said, "That's not necessarily true." "What do you mean?" asked Bakurio with his hopes reignited. "From what I can see, you seem to want to gain the benefits of all sage transformations, right?" said Jiraiya, to which Bakurio nodded in agreement. "Tch, how greedy, but it's not impossible, in theory at least," said Jiraiya as he looked at the crazy boy in front of him who was staring at him with shining eyes. "Do you know why there exist different sage transformations?" asked Jiraiya, wanting to see how much Bakurio knows about this, but to his surprise, the kid with such high aspirations simply shrugged and said, "No, I don't. I only know that you merge nature's chakra with your spiritual and physical energies to create a higher form of chakra." "Ha, kid, you really are crazy and too confident in yourself," said Jiraiya with a sigh as Mukai quickly said, "I agree," while drinking some of his toad juice. "Listen, you are correct about merging nature's energy with your physical and spiritual energy. But the location when doing this matters, and the way you do it also matters," said Jiraiya, and Bakurio replied with both confusion and understanding, "I believe you mean a location rich in natural energy, but what do you mean with the way? You see, physical energy can take many properties. The property you chose when you merge nature's energy determines the type of enhancement you receive. If you transform your physical energy into strength and merge it with nature's energy, you gain an enhancement to strength. But transforming physical energy into strength makes it harder to control as it becomes aggressive, and merging it with nature's energy would require a huge focus and precision, which is why I couldn't master it completely," said Jiraiya with a regretful sigh as Bakurio finally understood the reason this guy failed to master this jutsu. "So, because you focus too much on merging nature's energy with your own, you couldn't spare enough attention to absorb more energy, huh?" said Bakurio while rubbing his chin thoughtfully. "That's correct. That's why I need help from my two teachers to cover this flaw whenever I'm using Sage mode," said Jiraiya in embarrassment, and Bakurio surprised him when he said, "So, to increase the other physical attributes, you will have to turn your physical energy into agility or vitality before merging them with nature's energy. Agility tend to be swift and would become very hard to control. As for vitality, it tends to reject outside energies, so merging all three of them is simply daydreaming, huh? This kid is terrifyingly smart, and it seems like his knowledge of chakra is very high," thought Jiraiya before he nodded and said, "That's right, that would have indeed been hard for normal people, but I'm different. I have the multitask ability and I could level my control of them through my system," thought Bakurio, but he didn't say this to Jiraiya and only said, "Please teach me Strength Sage mode." "Fine. But it might take some time since we can't train it in a sacred ground like Mount Myoboku," said Jiraiya with a smile. "It's fine by me." And so Bakurio's training with Jiraiya began. Meanwhile, he sent Mukai and Kurama to find one sneaky snake. Meanwhile, inside a laboratory inside the land of sound, Orochimaru suddenly felt a shiver running down his spine. "What's going on? Why do I feel like something bad is going to happen?" muttered Orochimaru as his hand froze while he was doing an experiment, so he turned to one of his assistants and looked at him coldly. The assistant started shivering as he said, "Is everything okay, Lord Orochimaru? It seems he's not trying to stab me in the back," thought Orochimaru before he turned to his experiment thoughtfully. 2 months later. Thank you very much Jiraiya, said Bakurio from the bottom of his heart, as this guy truly taught him to the best of his abilities and he benefited a lot as he gained a few skills from this training. Nature's Chakra Absorption Level 42. Allows the user to absorb nature's chakra. At level 42, host can absorb the equivalent of 21% of their chakra, and store it to enter Sage Mode or use it to enhance the power of their techniques. The moment he gained this ability, Bakurio kept using it repeatedly to recharge the system, that's why its level rose quickly. But this wasn't all, as he also gained another ability. Strength Sage Mode Level 50. When active grants plus 500 points in STR, plus 3000 Phi, plus 100 Agi, and enhances the user's overall senses. Bakurio was only able to achieve this thanks to his multitask ability that helped him deal with the biggest difficulty the people learning Sage Mode had to deal with, not to mention having his save and load ability that could always help him get out of danger in case he makes a fatal mistake in Asura's chakra that enhanced his talent regarding nature's energy. But not only that, but he also used the reward he gained from the quest regarding meditation. Quest Meditation 2. Reach level 25 in your meditation. Reward. 150 points, Soothing Incense x10. This soothing incense helps the mind in focusing and enhances its senses, which is perfect to learn how to control and sense nature's energy. You are welcome, I never thought you would actually learn it in such a small amount of time, said Jiraiya while letting out a sigh of admiration, recalling how smooth sailing it seemed to be for this kid to learn how to sense nature's energy and strength Sage Mode despite not being in a sacred, which probably greatly hindered his progress. I did learn it, that's true, but I can't use it for long because my current chakra reserves are simply too small, replied Bakurio, who understood that another reason why not everyone tries to learn Sage Mode is because they simply don't have the chakra reserves to support the transformation for a long duration. Hopefully, I will fix this problem when I meet that snake, thought Bakurio as he remembered the information he received from Mukai just a week after he started training with Jiraiya, telling him that he found Orochimaru's base that was located to the north of Konoha in the Land of Sound. And through his communication device, he confirmed that he was there right now. You are still young, compared to kids your age, your chakra reserves are terrifying, said Jiraiya with a smile, trying to cheer Bakurio up, and the latter couldn't help but smile at this man he got closer to during this period of time and decided to say, well, it's time for me to leave. Oh, and by the way, you should visit Minato in Konoha when you have time. I revived him. Before Bakurio quickly vanished, leaving Jiraiya standing alone, speechless, before a yell echoed in the area. Why didn't you tell me before, you little bastard? But Bakurio was long gone, heading toward the Land of Sound while checking the rewards from 2 missions he completed a long time ago, and finally found the time to deal with them since he was going to meet the person that could help him achieve the best results from them, if he could get him to help him, that is. Quest Bloodline Enhancer 2. Raise one of your bloodlines to 25%. Reward 150 points, Bloodline Extractor, 1 use. Quest New Blood 1. Gain 2 different bloodlines of purity more than 20%. Reward. Bloodline Research, incomplete. Bloodline Extractor. Allows the user to extract a perfect bloodline sample. The bloodline extractor was in the shape of a syringe and Bakurio was planning to use it to extract a perfect sample of Hashirama's bloodline, but unfortunately, he couldn't integrate it just by injecting it into his body, as the world doesn't work that way. But that's where the reward of the second quest comes into play, and after Bakurio read through this incomplete research, he found that it contains so much information regarding the extraction and integration of bloodlines as well as how to modify them, but there were many missing parts and he concluded that he couldn't use them as he wasn't a scientist after all and couldn't even understand everything. So, he planned to meet Jiraiya so that he could learn the Snake Sage transformation from him, as well as make a deal with him to help integrate the Hashirama bloodline he already extracted. As for the possibility of Orochimaru turning to him to steal his body or something, well, a certain fox and an idiot will be with him just for that purpose, and there's always the save and load ability if the situation really requires it. So, he quickly traveled through the Land of Rivers and the Land of Fire until he arrived at a cave concealed by vegetation. And once getting inside, he was immediately attacked by someone that appeared behind him and tried to chop his neck, but Bakurio quickly tilted his head down and squatted slightly, effectively dodging the sneak attack with minimal movement, and returned with an attack of his own using his elbow. The assailant blocked that elbow easily and tried to attack again, but Bakuryo's voice suddenly echoed from behind him, startling him as he said, "Stop, Mukai." I actually didn't sense him at all. This kid is getting better and better. Mukai was really surprised as the Bakuryo he sneak attacked disappeared in a puff of smoke, but not before shooting Mukai a smug smile. "Tch, it's been a while," said Mukai as he extended his fist and Bakuryo bumped it with his own while replying, "A while indeed. Where's Kurama?" Mukai shrugged and said, "I don't know, he said he's going for a quick hunt." But before he could finish, an orange blur suddenly came from outside and landed on Bakuryo's shoulder. "You finally finished your training." "Tch, this guy is still as fast as ever. No, he appears to be even faster and with better control over his movement. It seems I'm not the only one who made improvements. Mukai too, I'm sure he mastered the Hyuga techniques I gave him." Bakuryo analyzed the two around him with a happy smile, and he couldn't help but think about Naruto and Sasuke. "I wonder how those two are doing." Before he turned his attention to Kurama. "Yes, I just finished not long ago. How's the situation with the little snake?" Mukai had a smirk on his face as he said, "He's hiding in his lair while some of his minions collect people with special bloodlines for him. I'm sure you have an idea about what he's doing with them." "Well, let's go and find out together," said Bakuryo with a smile, and Kurama excitedly said, "Finally, something fun to do." "Well, only you would consider visiting the base of a cage-level ninja fun," thought Bakuryo with a helpless look on his face as he looked at Kurama wiggling his tails happily. "Sure, I will lead the way," said Mukai with a smirk and quickly started running at Orochimaru's base without even trying to hide his presence anymore, and Bakuryo followed after him while muttering, "I feel bad for what's going to happen to Orochimaru." "Really?" replied Mukai, as he turned his head and shot Bakuryo a surprised look, to which the latter burst into laughter as an evil smile was plastered on his face as he said, "Of course not. Ha ha ha, I guessed so," said Mukai before the trio continued with evil smiles on their faces, causing Orochimaru to feel a chill before this triple disaster even arrived to his base. "Stop that man quickly!" "Ah!" yelled a man that had half of his face covered by a black cloth, but he was quickly knocked out from a black-clothed man punching him in the gut before he went on to the next guy blocking his path. "Warn Lord Orochimaru, these intruders are too dangerous," yelled another one, which resulted in him receiving a similar fate to the previous one, and Bakuryo and Kurama, who were following from a distance, simply watched Mukai opening a path for them easily through the ninjas working for Orochimaru, who didn't stand a chance until suddenly Mukai titled his body to avoid some kind of white pale spear that was thrown at him. However, he was surprised when he found out that it was made out of bones, but he didn't think too much of it as he sent it back to the direction it came from with a much more terrifying power and speed, and it was going to stab a seemingly normal wall. But it quickly morphed as a kid appeared from behind a veil that was seamlessly merging his presence with the wall and barely escaped Mukai's counterattack. "Oh, well, this was unexpected," said Mukai with a relaxed look as he started approaching this boy that was blocking their path. He had pale skin, vivid green eyes, angular facial features, 2 scarlet dots on his forehead which all the members of his clan possessed, and white long hair, which he wore divided down the middle on his head, distinguished by an atypical zigzag hair parting, with 2 separate partings on either side of his face and tied in a loose ponytail near the middle of his back. Bakuryo immediately recognized this boy, who appeared to be around 10 years old and was preparing to fight Mukai fearless. "Isn't this Kimimaro?" he thought before he suddenly stopped in front of Mukai and said, "Let me deal with this kid," said Bakuryo before he activated his 3 Tomo Sharingan, startling Kimimaro, who immediately took a defensive posture. "Let's see what you've got," said Bakuryo before he retrieved one of his short swords and attacked Kimimaro swiftly. "So fast," thought Kimimaro while barely dodging the sword slashes that were coming at him from all kinds of directions before Bakuryo did a spin and hit him with a kick that sent him flying a few meters away. But there was no delight in Bakuryo's face as he thought, "Tch, it felt like hitting a wall made of steel. This is probably his Kekkei Genkei Shikatsunyaku huh?" And his guess was right, because just when the kick was about to land on Kimimaro, the latter used this Kekkei Genkei that grants its user the ability to generate bones from any part of their body, and created a bone armor that covered his skin and absorbed the majority of the damage from the kick. "This kid is hard to deal with, not to mention that guy." Kimimaro was about to turn to look at Mukai, but he suddenly didn't find him there. No, there was nothing around him, as even the kid he was facing suddenly disappeared and was replaced by a shadowy figure as he found himself in a desolate land filled with death. And soon, skeletons started rising from the ground around him in all kinds of shapes and forms. What's going on? Did I fall under a genjutsu? When? Muttered Kimimaro in surprise as the skeletons started getting up one by one, and he knew that if his opponent wished, he would be dead by now, so he started fending off the skeleton and was preparing to use Orochimaru's curse seal to break the genjutsu, but suddenly he woke up and found Orochimaru standing beside him with his hands on his shoulder staring at the intruders who were discussing between themselves. Wow, Bakurio, that genjutsu was quick, said Mukai in approval, and Bakurio calmly replied, well, he was dumb enough to look into my eyes from the start, so it was quite easy. Indeed, Kimimaro was imagining the fight happening between the two of them, but in reality, Bakurio didn't move at all from his position. And now, he turned to look at Orochimaru, who was staring at his eyes with an intense desire which he didn't even bother to hide, prompting Bakurio to say, yo, Orochimaru, is this how you receive guests? I wonder what kind of guests keep lurking around my base for months before they directly barge in like this and cause all this mess, responded Orochimaru with an evil smile, while inside he was very wary of this trio, especially seeing Kurama among them, and he was ready to make a run for it at any time, but his curiosity held him back until now. Hearing what Orochimaru said, Bakurio shot Mukai a disappointed look and said, and here I thought you were doing it undetected. Mukai rubbed the back of his head and said in embarrassment, sorry, I really thought I did it undetected. Orochimaru shook his head and said, I must say, you were very skillful in your approach. Unfortunately, one of my bases was already discovered and raided once, so I started to take extra precautions just in case and developed methods of detection that can't be sensed using Konoha's dojutsu. At this point, Orochimaru looked at both Mukai, who had the Byakugan, and Bakurio, who had the Sharingan. He's probably talking about the incident that forced him to leave Konoha. But to think that he could detect Mukai. This guy is really amazing, thought Bakurio, and Mukai was having similar thoughts. Well, I'm sure you could already guess that we didn't come here to fight, but instead I have come to make a deal with you, said Bakurio, to which Orochimaru's eyes flickered slightly before he said, you must be that kid Bakurio, huh? Does Konoha know what you are trying to do? Hey, other than that old senile Hiruzen and Jiraiya, everyone in Konoha wants you dead. You really think they would want to make a deal with you? Replied Bakurio with a mocking smile, which made Orochimaru chuckle slightly as he said, true, before he gestured for them to follow him as he led them to a separate room while ordering his minions to go back to their tasks. However, Kimimaro still followed us and stuck closely to Orochimaru as if to protect him. Oh, how loyal, thought Bakurio before he shifted his attention to the snake in front of him. After sitting down in front of Orochimaru, which Bakurio understood that he was sneaky enough and he suspected that he might actually only be a shadow clone. He still spoke as if he was facing the real one and said, you helped Danzo with the integration of Hashirama's cells to create another wood-style user, and you keep gathering all kinds of bloodlines. At this point, Bakurio shot a look at Kimimaro before he continued, so, I guess your knowledge regarding this subject is top-notch, if not the best the world has to offer right now, and I want your help in a similar procedure. Orochimaru's eyes widened in surprise before he suddenly smiled and said, and what makes you think I wouldn't do anything unwanted to your bod? However, before he could even finish, a terrifying aura emanating from Kurama and Mukai blasted him and caused the walls of the underground structure to crack as terrible killing intent covered the area, and Bakurio calmly said amidst this storm, if you try anything, these two would kill you, and if you keep your greed in check, I could even help you in your research for immortality. Orochimaru wasn't fazed by the killing aura, unlike Kimimaro, who became worried and started covering his body with bones, and he even started activating the curse mark as droplets of sweat fell from his head and kept waiting for Orochimaru to signal to him to take action. But he never expected to see him so shocked, to the point that he stood up and yelled at Bakurio, how do you know this? Oh, it seems we might make a deal after all, said Bakurio with a smile as Orochimaru smiled nervously and said, it seems I'm getting myself involved with a bigger mess than the Akatsuki. Thank you for listening, guys. See you in the next part.